Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
A 17-year-old girl is dead and a 16-year-old boy is critically ill after two unrelated shootings last night in London in the space of just an hour. Eyewitnesses say the girl who died was with friends in Tottenham in North London when someone opened fire from a passing car. Her friends say she was killed for no reason. These latest attacks come amid concern about rising violent crime. 47 people have been killed in London in the first 3 months of this year alone. 31 of the victims were fatally stabbed. That compares to 116 murders in London for the whole of last year. Our community affairs correspondent Adina Campbell reports.
A community in mourning. Today, family and friends remember 17-year-old Tanisha Melbourne, who died in a drive-by shooting last night. The teenager had been with friends shortly before she was shot from a car near Northumberland Park in Tottenham. Dada and his 12-year-old son Malachi were in the area when it happened.
I heard the shot them. I thought it was the Easter holiday and it was just firecrackers, as is normal. It's when after I drive out, say about 10 minutes after that, I drive out from my house, I see all the commotion, I hear what I go and I try come down the road, the police them block it off.
How do you feel about what's happened?
I just feel like sad because it was a girl as well. Yeah, it's exactly.
Are you worried about your future and growing up here?
Yeah, because I'm a boy, so I'm more at like risk, and I'm black as well. So yeah.
Forensic teams have spent the day gathering evidence in this cordoned-off road, watched on by members of the local community.
I've never heard a young girl being shot. No, never, never, never in my life. What would she do so bad that somebody would end her life like that? She's not even started her life, she's a baby.
Tanisha is the 9th teenager to be violently killed in London this year. But there have been 47 killings in the capital since the start of 2018, mainly caused by shootings or stabbings.
We're doing everything we can lawfully to deal with the rise, using every tactical option available to us, enhancing the police presence in key locations, but most of all working with communities.
Many people here in Tottenham say they're shocked but not surprised by what's happened. And that's because over the years, some say problems have been building up and getting worse. Right here on this road, for example, near to this parade of shops, some people have told me they're too scared to leave their homes once it gets dark, underlining a real sense of fear in this community. This wasn't the only violent crime around the same time in North London last night. 2 miles away in Walthamstow, a 16-year-old boy was found with gunshot wounds and is now in a critical condition, while another boy, aged 15, was taken to hospital with stab wounds. He's been left with life-changing injuries.
So it's not surprising.
This latest rise in gun and knife crime has caused widespread anger, particularly from local campaigners.
The government come out and, you know, they're very proud about their new websites for anti-knife and anti-violence, and the website is not a representation of where young people are at the moment. My thing is that the government are wasting money and they're not focusing on what's really needed out there, and that's why this keeps happening.
So far there have been no arrests, but tributes for Tanisha continue to grow. Another life lost on the streets of London. Adina Campbell, BBC News in Tottenham.
Our home editor Mark Easton is here. 47 killings this year alone in this wave of violent crime. What is going on?
Well, it is, this loss of life deeply troubling, particularly young people still in their teens. And after years of the murder rate falling in London, it's understandable that people are wondering whether now it's started to go back up again. In all honesty, I think it's probably too early to say that anything really significant has changed. With crimes that are relatively rare, there will be natural rises and falls over time. Violence and deliberate killing in London have been declining quite radically over the last 20 years or so, and actually London remains one of the safest cities in the world. It does have a problem with gangs, and some will say that perhaps police resources have not been there to put into gathering the intelligence to disrupt those gangs. Maybe that's part of it. But it's not true to say that if you have more police, you'll have fewer murders. There are actually more police in London now than there were 5 years ago, and yet the murder rate has slightly increased. Police will be looking at what they can do to save lives, to disrupt gangs, to perhaps stop and search more often, to look for knives, to deal with the problem of guns in the capital. But the reasons for the murder rate rising or falling are much more complicated than just the number of bobbies on the beat.
Mark Easton, thank you.
The shooting dead of a teenage girl in London has heightened fears that gun and knife crime are out of control. 17-year-old Tanisha Melbourne was killed in a suspected drive-by shooting last night. Her family say she wasn't the target and was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Witnesses have told ITV News she died in her mother's arms. Less than an hour later, and just 3 miles away, a 16-year-old boy was shot in the face and remains in a critical condition. Neil Connery now on the rising tide of gang violence.
On the capital streets, another family mourn a young life taken violently. At the place where a 17-year-old girl, known locally as Tanisha Melbourne, was shot and killed last night, her family and friends gathered this afternoon to comfort each other in their grief. Tanisha was with friends in Tottenham when it's thought a car pulled up and shots were fired. Forensic officers have spent much of the day at the scene. Paramedics and Tanisha's mother tried to save her.
17 years old, she didn't deserve that. Her mum didn't deserve to watch her die. But paramedics, they helped, they did a good job. They could do all they could do.
Just 3 miles away, in an unconnected shooting in Walthamstow last night, a 16-year-old boy was left fighting for his life, while another boy who's 15 was taken to hospital with stab wounds. Tanisha is the 9th teenager to be murdered in the capital since the start of the year. Altogether, there have been 47 murders in just over 3 months. It's a figure on track to surpass the 130 total from 2017. That was a year that saw a 23% rise in knife crime offences in London and a 16% rise in gun crime. In Tottenham, Tanisha's murder has generated a deep sense of shock among residents.
I'm just absolutely devastated because so many young people are just dying, like just a loss of innocence. And I just want to say that there's so much hope for young people.
As more flowers were left, a message from one of Tanisha's younger sisters read, "You will always be in our hearts."
Well, this evening the Metropolitan Police say they are keeping an open mind about possible motives in this attack. They're appealing to anyone with information to contact them as soon as possible. There has been a sense of anger here during the day. Tanisha's aunt said this afternoon, "We're going to stop the shooting. My niece has gone. My sister is in turmoil. It's terrible," she said.
Neil Connery in North London, thank you.
The statistics are grim. 2 teenagers shot, a 3rd teenager stabbed in London in the space of an hour. The reality seems worse, with the local MP stating that although there's no single cause, there has been a big spike in gun and knife crime across the capital, and local residents are complaining of a spiral of violence. Simeon Brown has this report.
She was just 17, but Tanisha has been named by friends as London's 47th murder victim of 2018.
This is such a shock. 17 years old, she didn't deserve that. Her mum didn't deserve to watch her die.
She was a good girl, positive girl, you know. Yeah, she was like the face for the community. A lot of people know her. Once you go on the high road, you know her, you see her, you get me? She's good. I even know her dad, her mum, the whole family. You see me, I want to say RIP to the whole family. I hope everything goes well for them. I want to just support the family and make everything go good, you know?
Inch by inch, this short road in North London is being swept for any clue that can help get justice for the latest teenager murdered in the capital.
We were told that a group of up to 12 young people was seen in this spot last night at around 8:30 p.m. This was shortly before a gun was fired, and we now know that a 17-year-old girl lost her life.
Since she was identified locally, Tanisha's death has been alarming for a number of reasons. 2018 has seen a long list of young men murdered, but Tanisha is believed to have been caught in the crossfire.
That will be one avenue of inquiry. Officers are keeping an open mind as to the circumstances, and it may be that she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. We don't know at this stage.
In March, the numbers of murders being investigated in London overtook New York for the second month in a row. The Met Police are looking into 22 murders from last month. That's one more than in the once infamous New York, although 2 of those incidents were outside the capital's borders. There have since been 2 murders in London within the first 3 days of this month, and one teenager is fighting for his life after being shot in East London's Walthamstow.
The figures comparing London and New York are complex. Overall, they show that both cities are far safer than they were, but they do reveal that London has entered a new phase of serious violence. And with knife crime in particular, you're more vulnerable if you're young and you're black.
For London to overtake New York in terms of the murder rate is shocking and horrifying to many of us who've lived and loved being in this capital city. For me as the local MP, the thing I'm deeply, deeply concerned about and I think needs special attention is how is it that young boys, so 15, 16-year-old boys, are getting hold of firearms? That's not been part of our local makeup before. It's clearly a worrying trend.
A trend that the Home Office says is only a small percentage of all recorded crime, and that their new strategy will put a stronger focus on preventing violence whilst ensuring the strongest possible law enforcement response. But for the family and friends of Tanisha, her life has already been taken, and during an epidemic, just what can keep teenagers safe?
Well, now, Leroy Logan is a former superintendent in the Metropolitan Police. He retired in 2013 after 30 years' service. Sefton Henry was a former gang member in London for 16 years and now works for Gangs Line, a charity supporting young people involved in gang culture. And Temi Mawali is the founder of the community organisation The Forefront Project that works to reduce serious youth violence. Well, if that is what you're trying to do, what's your analysis of what's happening?
I think what we see today is not a surprise, it's not shocking, because there's nothing radically different has been done over the last 18 years. Young people being involved in serious youth violence isn't something that's new. We've had teenagers and young people being killed in the capital and other cities in this country over the last 20 years. And I think what we haven't done is actually engage with young people in a meaningful way about what being violently victimized means to them, the impacts of violence on their life. They haven't received any meaningful support to come to terms with this violence. And in addition to that, we've had all other kinds of services cut, mental health services cut, youth services cut, homelessness is on the rise, substance abuse is on the rise. The picture is very bleak, and all of these factors are contributing.
Former superintendent, as I must regard you, what's your analysis?
Well, I think it's a combination of knowing that violence has moved on since it was 10 years ago, and I don't think police are really understanding what young people go through in terms of the grooming on the street to start thinking they should carry a knife or a gun, the fear factor involved in that, and of course...
Were they as young as this when you were on the street?
Well, they weren't as young as this, I must admit, and we didn't see the numbers of crimes that we're seeing now. This 26% increase over the last year is absolutely devastating. And of course, when you see a person who's a victim, it seems like an assassination in terms. We need to start saying police need to be a lot more effective, and they can't arrest their way out of this problem. They can't stop and search their way out of this problem. It has to be holistic, working with the community. But if they're treating young people without respect or dignity, then you're going to get alienation, and young people are not going to work with police as they should. Well, now, I mean, as a former gang member yourself, I mean, do you detect these are much younger than people you used to associate with? And so, what's your approach?
I was 8 when I first got involved in gangs. I was groomed into selling drugs.
By whom? By what sort of a person?
By other gang members.
Other youngsters?
They were 23, 24 at the time. The problem is that we spend more time. I mean, a
23-year-old trying to groom an 8-year-old. How does that work?
We spend more time at work than with our kids. That's one of the massivest problems. The system doesn't work. You know what I mean? We're trying to figure out different things, but the system in place is not working.
What is the system?
The system is that you spend more time at work than with your kids, because when you have a child and you get 6 months maternity leave and then you're kind of ripped away from your child, then the child's put into school and he's constantly there. Who's he going to be around? He's going to be around other gang members.
Before this programme, you said to me, let's spend the time talking about solutions.
Please.
So what is the solution? Talk to me about solutions.
To me, we need a long-term public health approach. And I know a lot of people have spoken about public health in the last few months, and not really in a meaningful way, in a way where we talk about what in substance that means. I think that's a long-term strategy we need to be investing in over the next 15 years. However, I'm aware that when we start speaking about that type of approach, people don't know what we can do in the short term. And I think that's what I wanted to talk about today, because I can feel the panic in the air, the tension in the air. People don't know what we can do.
So short term?
In the short term, things I would like to see. We have lost, you know, almost 30 young people since the beginning of the year. We need services immediately for their families and for their friends, bereavement services to help people come to terms with pain and loss, because young people, when they are violently victimised, it becomes a culture of desensitisation because no one speaks to them about what this loss means.
Well, OK, let's talk about youth workers.
Right.
Well, they're a diminishing number.
Very much so.
So you're asking for investment in youth services?
In the generic and general youth services, yes, but we also need specialist support services.
But you're pushing a rock up a hill.
Well, that would be me, exactly.
You,
I'm a former gang member, so a specialist, you need to understand gangs. You're not going to change this problem until we are heard, you know?
OK, well, the community called you in because there's been this incident.
Yes. So I done the training for MOPAC. I sat with the mayor and I advised him, but he didn't take on what I said. So how are we going to have a change?
What did you say?
Empowering
What did you say?
So I told him that we should put in a pilot where people like myself and like Temi could actually put something forward that would actually make a difference, but he's not doing that.
I think the experiences that we need to work on, it's not just people having being involved in crime or being involved in gangs. This is not necessarily the answer. Even young people who are older that have been through this when they're younger, they haven't necessarily been through, come to terms with what they've been through in terms of the trauma that they've faced. So I think it's not as simple as saying these are the gang members, we need those people working with the young people. No, we need a holistic support that works with individuals and the entire community. Like I said to you before the show, Tanisha was shot yesterday. Her friends watched. What support will they receive after watching that? Because they're going to have flashbacks and nightmares for years to come. They'll never get that image out of their head.
Well, now, something persuaded Mrs May some years ago when she was Home Secretary to cut the number of police on the streets. I mean, what effect has that had? And would putting more police on the street make any difference?
It's important to have the right number of police officers, but also reflecting the community with that cultural intelligence to understand the target group of young people that you need to be working with. Young people will work with police if they believe that they are subject to a service, not an occupying force. Unfortunately, a lot of young people are believing that they're over-policed and under-protected.
But if you cut police numbers, you can only be an occupying force because there's not the numbers to be anything more.
Do you think that's going to stop me carrying a gun?
Let me just finish for a minute. Let me just finish for a minute. Let me just finish for a minute.
I don't think it would.
No, well,
I would still carry a gun. You need to understand that we're not being heard. And when the people are not being heard, they rebel.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I agree.
You're
but
talking about other
aspects.
That
police.
I only got called out here when someone got killed.
Let him finish
I'm not here to say that policing is right, but I know that there's a minimum number of officers. We're going under 30,000 for the first time in 15 years. We've got 700 less detectives across the Met over the last few years. So obviously, they're reacting, they're not proactive because they haven't got that resilience. Even the intelligence analysis. So if information comes in, the borough intelligence units don't have the analysis to make officers be deployed in the right place to make sure they're stopping the right sort of people.
So we do need more police numbers when it comes to it, and the right sort of police numbers.
And reflecting on the community.
We've got that. So
at a basic level in relation to the police, if the police are there to protect and serve, but young people don't feel protected or served by them, they don't feel able to call them if their life is under threat, they have no relationship with them to when their life is under threat. Let's just look at it like that. That drives violence. If I can't call the police, what am I going to do? I have to take matters into my own hand. My community has to take matters into its own hand. We have a vigilante culture. It doesn't include the police.
OK, and Your final point?
Yeah, I don't believe that police can actually stop this thing. I believe the communities have to stand together and actually stand up for what's happening. Society has to realise that there's a problem within society.
I truly believe it's people power that's going to make the difference, not down to police or politicians.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Leroy. Thank you very much indeed, Sefton, and thank you too, Tammy.
On any ordinary day in this country, the fatal shooting of a 17-year-old girl would be news, but never more so than now. The death of Tanisha Melbourne last night in Tottenham, North London, has brought to a head growing worries at what looks like an epidemic of murders in London. In just the last hour, police have confirmed the death of a 16-year-old boy who was shot in a second attack yesterday, shortly after that, on Tanisha. Well, it brings the number of suspected murders in the capital this year to 48. 45 of those murders happened in the first quarter, January until the end of March, and that is about twice the level of the same three-month period in the last couple of years. It's surprising that it's taken so long for this to reach such a high level of concern. But since the Sunday Times reported the London murder rate has overtaken that of New York, concern is focusing on stabbings and shootings by young people in particular, often in gang-related activity. So let's be clear about the scale of the problem this year compared to the past. Now, first, this is the grim tally of murders in London and New York this year. And you'll see London in red, London did have more than New York in March and February, but January was a very different story, and overall, New York has had slightly more. Here's the longer-term context. New York used to have a much higher murder rate than London. That's in the blue line you're going to see here, but its rate has plummeted since the 1990s. London is the flat line. It's had a flattish rate all along. But murders in London have been rising over the last few years, not to historically high levels, at least not last year, but they've been rising all the same. Well, you can see it there. What is going on? Let's hear now from Katie Razzle, who spent the day in Tottenham.
Literally, the car just pulled up on them. Literally. They didn't have any signs, they didn't hear anything. The car just pulled up and then just started shooting outside the window. Yeah, that's what I heard. This is such a shock. 17 years old. She didn't deserve that. Her mum didn't deserve to watch her die.
17-year-old Tanisha Melbourne, the latest young person apparently in the wrong place at the wrong time. Last night in this street in Tottenham, North London, she became the 5th person shot dead in the capital this year. 42 others have died of knife wounds. With the police carrying out fingertip searches, yet another street, yet another community coming to terms with an act of senseless violence.
Not many people around here want to speak on camera about what happened last night and how a 17-year-old girl could end up shot dead in the street. But one woman did talk to me privately about what it's like to live around here. She said her son has told her about the postcode wars going on between gangs. He's 16 years old and she says he doesn't leave the house after dark for fear of getting caught up in it.
I'm not part of it. Yeah, you can feel it here. Put your hand here.
A local man showed me where his car had been hit by a bullet last year.
They took my car for forensic for almost a month. This door is in spray. You can look, the paint are different. Yeah, it was parked in the car park. And I think they were fighting. I don't know what happened. And boom.
And how does it make you feel, the fact that it's happening around here, that a girl died?
No, I haven't got anything to say because I don't even... That area is rough. That's the only thing I got. Even the police can't handle it.
He then told me about the young man he knew who was killed nearby in February. 22-year-old Kobe Nelson was stabbed yards from his home.
Yeah, he died. My wife used to take care of him when he was a baby, so we are very close.
And late this afternoon, a 16-year-old boy became the 6th gunshot fatality this year, shot in Walthamstow yesterday, minutes after Tanisha Melbourne was killed a few miles away. Earlier today, as the teenager was fighting for his life in hospital, the local MP talked to Newsnight about how cuts have impacted local policing.
I've never seen resources so scarce on the ground to be able to have the relationships with people, to get that community intelligence, to support what our police are doing. We've lost 100 police from around here already in the cuts coming through from government, and I've stood up in Parliament and begged and pleaded ministers to give us those people so that we can start getting that community intelligence.
This map charts the killings in London since the start of the year. Behind every mark, a life taken, a family bereaved. The murders have led to unfavourable comparisons with New York, a city which has dramatically cut its homicide numbers since the 90s. So what is happening in London?
A lot of people are saying that it's resources that is causing this increase in murder rates. However, New York City and London have very similar numbers of officers and a very similar budget. So what we should be looking at is why New York, with the same resources, is doing significantly better in their decreased rate of homicides than London is.
Growing up, my dream is to become a footballer.
As part of a new serious violence strategy, the government recently launched a series of adverts aimed at combating knife crime. It's also looking into new laws against offensive weapons.
Moving at the hip.
This community boxing club in South London is at the sharp end, trying to steer young people away from street violence.
I've just come from the house of a young man that was stabbed and killed on Easter Sunday. Last year we had an even worse year than we've had this year. We had 4 participants murdered in the year. 3 of them were murdered in the space of 4 weeks, all separate incidences. None of them were heavily involved gang members, criminals. They were just members of the public who had they were well known, but they weren't bad people. And I think the easy option for us is to blame the government and blame the police, like the option used to be to blame the parents. In fact, everyone's got to look at it. What's the saying? It takes a village to raise a child. We've got broken communities.
And that report was from Katie Rousel. Now, Sophie Linden is the Deputy Mayor of London, and she has responsibility for policing and crime in the capital. Stafford Scott is a community activist from Tottenham who's campaigned for the rights of the black community there since the 1980s. Very good evening to you both. I want to get into the causes of what is happening at the moment. And Stafford, you're close to some of the communities that have been affected by this. What do you think has happened in the last 12 months that has seen the murder rate rise so sharply?
I mean that there's a myriad of different things that have contributed to it, but I don't think that we should fool ourselves that this is something that's just happened in the last 12 months. This is something that's been happening for decades. The young people that we see out there at the moment, the young people that Sophie, the MOPAC and the police want to stereotype as gang members, those young people are ostracized from the mainstream. They are the children of the already marginalized. They get no services, they get no support. They're left by themselves and they're very, very angry. They've created their own society. You've heard about it, social media driven. Some of them can put out a video and it can get 30,000 hits. Generally, that video is of somebody else being violated. The person who is violated then feels absolutely duty-bound to then go and take action. But let's be clear, this is an extension of a community that has long learnt to police itself and to regulate itself, because we've not been able to get the support of the police service because they've always been an institutionally racist organisation. So that gulf that's left where we're not police means that we've learned to police ourselves. And these
in the way, the eye for eye, tooth for tooth way.
They've taken it to an incredibly crazy level of doing.
Let me get... So, Sophie, I know you'll have your own... You think other things are going wrong, but what do you say to that account of what has been happening? And in particular, how it's actually not really that new?
I agree with Stafford that it's not completely new. It's not just in the last year. We've seen violent crime in London rise since about 2014. It's rising in London, but it's also rising outside London as well. What I don't agree with Stafford is that we are deliberately setting out to stereotype individuals from communities. We know that there is an issue with, and we've analysed this and looked at the evidence around, particularly around victims. There's a really disproportionate number of young black men who are the victims of murder and the victims of knife crime. And we have to do something about that.
And most people looking at it are saying oh, it's a gang thing. And I know that you think that's a completely faulty analysis, Stafford. But what is wrong with that? I mean, what is wrong with saying there's a gang problem in some of these communities?
The problem with that is that we've seen over the years the pathologization and the essentialization of black youth to the degree where it means that those who have a responsibility for coming up with effective interventions for addressing this, they're totally going down a misguided route. They're spending a lot of money.
And what are they spending money on, and what would you like them to be spending money on?
They're spending money on the wrong things. They're spending money on things like Operation Shield, which was collective punishment, which was branding kids as being in gangs, telling them if one commits a crime, they'll commit another. £200,000 they spent on a pilot of Shield. It was a total flop. They could have put that money into our communities. They could have built capacity in our communities to engage and intervene with our young people, and they've steadfastly chosen not to do it. Every response that they've given is a punitive one.
It's
about policing.
It's about
every
policing.
single
And that is a
response.
really interesting argument, Sophie, that is not about policing, and policing is the wrong response and is the one, naturally, the police give.
I agree with you. It's not just about policing, but policing is part of the solution. And Stafford talks about Operation Shield. Operation Shield was a couple of years ago under the previous administration. I agree with him. It didn't work. I didn't think it would work at the time. What we are doing is exactly what Stafford's talking about, is we are investing in small community projects. We're putting £1.4 million worth of money. We've already announced some of the projects, and it's very small groups of community groups, such as Dynamics in doing a boxing in
You'll agree on that, though, I think.
Somalian families.
So what's wrong? I thought that's what you were advocating.
I won't agree on it because, as you just said, this is across the UK. This isn't about projects. This is about structural racism that is impacting on our young people. Too many of our young people are being excluded from schools. This is about Cameron and Boris Johnson saying immediately after the riots that the gangs were responsible. We had 4 reviews, including the Metropolitan Police's own review, and all of them said there was no evidence of gang orchestration. But the state has continued as if there's evidence of this gang involvement.
So when you look at the evidence of what's driving the violence that we're seeing on the streets of London at the moment, the number of knife crime injuries and murders that are gang-related, it is there, but we've seen that fall. And the Metropolitan Police talk about it, that actually what we're seeing, yes, we're seeing an issue with gangs. It's more violent when it's gang-related, but we are also seeing an issue with young people picking up knives and using guns that aren't members of gangs. It's not all gang-related.
So that's really important to understand. It's not all gangs.
And we are working. When we talk about trying to tackle gangs, we're not just talking about enforcement. We've got the London Gang Exit Programme, which is actually beginning to to bear fruit and is helping young men leave the gang lifestyle.
Give some statistics, please. Because we know that you've got 4,000 on the gangs matrix. So how many have gone on the exit programme?
We've only had a small number on the London Gang Exit, but the gangs matrix, we are reviewing the gangs matrix at the moment because there have been a number of serious concerns.
The gangs matrix is the...
So the gangs matrix is how the Metropolitan Police identify individuals who are at risk of violence
so
and
that's
are
the
also
bad
in
bit
gangs.
of the spending in your view.
It's racial profiling that is very worse.
And so, Sophie Linden, isn't the obvious thing to do a lot more of the gang exit programme if that seems to be working? And isn't that what worked in Glasgow when they had a problem in the 2000s? So, it was intensive care for smallish numbers of people who were at very high risk.
So what worked in Glasgow was a combination of enforcement, taking control of the streets as they talk about it, stop and search, and the police using enforcement alongside a public health approach. And that's what we are doing in London. You absolutely think the police have a role to play, of course they do, but as part of our strategy to tackle knife crime and violence and gun crime, we are investing, yes, in gang exit programmes, but also investing in mental health services and in working in schools.
But you were advocating that approach. I mean, that's exactly what you were saying.
I wasn't. What we want is prevention. What we want is education. What we want is young people who can grow up with aspiration and hope that they can find a place for themselves in this society. What this government and previous governments are giving us is totally the opposite. And that's why this year you're seeing this. And if we don't come up with new ways of doing it, if those in authority do not start listening to the communities from where these young people come, we'll be back here next year hearing Sophie say something.
I think we need to think about what the government needs to do, and I agree with you, the government needs to step up and do much more on prevention, because at the moment it's taking money out of the services that are going to help prevent young people. Then there's what the Mayor, myself and the Metropolitan Police can do. We are investing in prevention and early intervention.
And we asked the government to come, but they didn't want to join in. Thank you both very much indeed.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me this evening, Aisha Hazarika and Tom Newton-Dunn. We're going to start with the Metro. What's in the Metro? It's in the Express. The headline for the Express, how many more innocents must die? This is the killing of Tanisha Melbourne, the 17-year-old that was shot and died in her mother's arms.
Absolutely tragic. Another young boy was killed last night as well in Walthamstow. Another boy was stabbed, and we've reached this horrific statistic where the sort of murder rate in our capital city, London, is higher than it is in New York. This is absolutely horrendous. And our hearts go out to the friends, the families of everybody affected by this. But, you know, this is a huge problem in London right now. And it's very, very complicated in terms of how to get to the bottom of it. There's so many interconnected issues. Policing is definitely a question. There's a very interesting article from an ex-Scotland Yard detective in the Express who says, you know, he used to know his beat really well. He used to know the families, the kind of intelligence he would get from knowing his patch. But, of course, there's been horrendous cuts to police. Police morale is very low as well. People are leaving in droves. There are huge issues in terms of services getting cut for young people, after-school clubs. They're sort of hanging around, not doing anything. These youth workers are telling us that actually these, you know, activities can be a lifeline for people. There's somebody here who's the chief executive of the St Giles Trust. So there's so much of this mental health issues. There's this idea of, you know, role models for young Black and Asian boys as well. All of this is so interconnected, but we have got a serious problem and we have to get a grip on it.
Yeah, so many elements, as Aisha's saying there, Tom. And we had Cressida Dick saying, I think yesterday, that social media actually had quite a significant part to play as well.
And in fact, there's a story in another paper tonight where the Home Secretary is now talking about getting social media companies, when they put forward these sorts of material that just encourages people to go out and kill and murder because they're tough members of gangs, to get social media companies to take this stuff down. It's part of their responsibility. It's not just to take down terrorist content or paedophile content, but content that encourages murder actively like this. And I think we get to this sort of stage every 2 or 3 years. There gets to a tipping point where suddenly you get this sort of series of appalling deaths all coming at once, and we all pay attention, and then it goes away again. I think that's the tragedy of the story, of making something this stick, so actual action happens. 47 deaths in 1 year alone is horrific on our capital streets. One thing that Isha didn't mention, I think, does also play into this. There's obviously police numbers. There's also stop and search.
Which has been pulled back.
Which has undergone huge reform, actually under Theresa May initially as Home Secretary, and then obviously she pushed that through as Prime Minister, where police simply are not allowed anymore to do as much stop and search as they would have liked to, so they definitely can't search kids anymore for knives.
You can't stop and search everybody, and one of the things, I mean, I'm all for...
You can't, but the point is about this, what the police are saying...
more powers on this.
Yeah, but just to finish the point, what the police are saying is, if they can't make kids scared of them anymore, because they can't stop them, they can't take away their lives.
I went into Brixton Prison recently. It's full of young people, sometimes in for their second, third time. And you know, there's a great quote here from a youth worker from St Giles that says, "Nothing stops a bullet like a job." This is really, really complicated. This is about giving young people, sort of sending them the message that there's a better life for them, not getting involved in this trouble and these gangs from a really young age. Some of these gangs start recruiting kids from when they're primary schools. So it's very complicated. The police and all their powers are definitely important, but you have to look at a much more holistic view as well.
Many elements involved.